Welcome everyone to the miscellaneous period of Bible study. We're going to be out of the Bible, having just completed Mark's Gospel. And before we begin Matthew's Gospel, we're going to talk about things that are interesting to us, things we don't understand and we want to understand better, and things we want to contribute and talk about. So, hello, darling. We just looked at the article that you were so kind to send us. Jeanette, say hello to Virginia, guest here today.
Hi, Virginia. How are you?
This is Jeanette.
This is Cindy,
Hi,
Virginia, and
Oh, I
Connie.
beg your pardon.
my
I
friend
didn't
Virginia.
realize.
Welcome, Virginia. Thank you.
Now, we're going to change the focus, not from what Jeanette sent us. We're actually going to refocus on that. But we're going to skip the Shroud of Turin for today until Jeff comes back next week. Now we're going to shift the focus and look at things that may be a little bit closer to home for you all. Because very soon, we may have to make a decision about whether or not Sharia will be part of American constitutional law, or maybe the decision will be made for us. We just don't know yet. But have you ever considered this question?
Absolutely.
About Sharia? Should Sharia have a place in this community, in United States jurisprudence? Remember, I just said have a place in U.S. law, not replace it. It should be, part of it. But let's take a look at some of the components that we need to answer this question. And we're not going to answer the question here. That's your personal decision. We're just going to talk about what it is and where it is and what it does. So the first question we're going to ask is, what is Sharia? And obviously we won't answer every question about Sharia, but the hope is that it will help us to get more information, what you need to know, how you see it, how it's best explained to you, so that you can answer, do you want Sharia as part of this country's courts of law? And I'm going to share with you what I learned while I was writing this mini lecture. And I just have to tell you, it's very complicated. Very hard to come to a clear-cut decision because there's just so much to learn. First of all, Sharia, it's a beautiful word, right? It's Arabic, and it means the correct path, the way. And it refers to the divine counsel that Muslims must follow so that they can grow closer to God, to Allah, and so that they can lead a moral life. And Sharia comes from two main sources, the Quran, which is considered the direct word of God, and the Hadith, which becomes part of the Sunnah, which is a collection of the sayings and the actions of Muhammad, who is the prophet of Allah. So these two, the Quran and the Hadith, together they form the Sunnah books. And these books of Sunnah are filled with traditions from many sources, not just Islam, not just Muslim sources, but there are also Jewish and Christian traditions in the Quran. And the examination of Sharia becomes even more challenging when we examine that there are not only two sources of Sharia, but there are also two very different kinds of Muslims. Shias and Sunnis. And sometimes these two groups, the Shias and the Sunnis, don't get along with each other. Forget about getting along with the whole wide world. It's so much worse than Missouri Synod and ELCA Lutherans. Very tricky. Shias are the minority. They account for only 10% of the world's Muslims. And they mostly come from these 5 countries: Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Lebanon, Iraq, and of course, Iran. Those are Shias. Now the Sunnis are 90% approximately on the global level. So clearly a majority. And the major Sunni nations, there's just a huge list of them, but major: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Pakistan, and many, many more. Now Shias and Sunnis usually don't get along, not anywhere, not in their own countries, and certainly not here. Now, Dearborn, Michigan, very large population of Muslims, mostly Shia. But other US cities that have very large Muslim populations are mostly Sunni. See if that has anything to do as you know go through what's happening now. Now that breakdown between those 2 groups have real consequences for the United States. Even in correctional facilities here in the United States, in prisons and jails, there are consequences. For example, did you know that the fastest growing religion in US prisons is Islam? Yeah, Islam. And this matters. You kind of knew it, but I didn't know it in a scholarly sense. It was always part of a program, you know, or a part of a book, a fictional book. You know, he went in a criminal, he came out a good Muslim or something. But it has real consequences on government institutions. For example, the Supreme Court of the United States has been hearing cases about this for years. I didn't realize cases that have been brought forward to the Supreme Court by convicted, incarcerated Muslims, converts mostly, who want the right to worship separately. They don't want Sunni Shiite services mushed together, you know, not together, keep them separate. Now, did you know that? I didn't even know that was a major issue in institutions. So, now that you know that, what does that mean for good functioning of good government in the United States, right? So, a quick explanation of how and why there are 2 groups of Muslims in the world today, Shias and Sunnis. And it has to be very brief because it's a very complicated issue. Both Sunnis and Shias are Muslims. But the controversy begins with the Prophet Muhammad's death. His death in the 7th century. And the question is, who is designated by Allah to be the new leader? Who should follow the Prophet Muhammad as the religious and political leader of Islam? And Shias and Sunnis have very different answers to those questions. Now, interesting, in the United States, most Muslims who live here, citizens, guests, whatever, are Sunnis. But both groups are well represented. Some say Sunnis comprise about 55 to 60% of Muslims in the United States. But interesting, all Muslims in the United States, it seems, tend to vote mostly for the Democratic Party, which kind of surprised me because I always think of Islam as being a rather conservative religion, right? They're not New Age, you know, go out and sit in the sun topless or something, absorb the helios. You know. They really take it very seriously to uphold traditions, traditional values like family and faith. No drugs, no alcohol, no premarital sex, more parental control and education, definitely heterosexuality. So I thought they would vote more conservatively, because doesn't that seem to be, we kind of think of conservatives with those values. That's just not true, and I have a lot of reasons that people have told me to share with you, but I'm trying so desperately to keep politics out of this and keep it cultural, keep it religious, keep it respectful. So what if a Sunni wants to become a Shia? Well, no problem, I'm told. Sunnis and Shias are sects, right? The religion, Islam, would remain the same. But under the table, my Muslim friend said, it's not true. Don't. It's very easy to change from one to another, but just don't tell your father or your grandfather or something like that you're changing, because it matters to families. But how else are Sunni and Shias different? Well, very complicated answer and very controversial. And what I'm sharing with you are not cold, hard facts. I'm actually sharing the opinions of others to describe how some people see themselves and how they see other people. So as you can imagine, not everyone agrees with everything I'm about to tell you. So we're going to proceed with caution, but let's proceed. Some people say Shiites are Islamists, very, very strict. Believers that the religion is Islam is not just a religion. It is actually your reason to live. Islamist believes that religion must be everything, and religion includes worship and education and being part of the government and the architecture in your community and the art in your community and the security, being part of the army and the navy and of course the court systems. So you get the picture, it's everywhere. Sunnis tend to be more ecumenical, conservative, but perhaps more open to different ways to govern and operate in the non-Muslim world, if you get my idea. And that kind of sounds simplistic, and this issue is not simple. But there are so many other proverbial bones of contention between these two groups. I just don't know enough about it to give you the proverbial bottom line. And also, the bottom line just seems to be changing all the time. Who's in power and who. So, on the TV here, for example, we see American kids marching in favor of Muslim Sunnis who live in Gaza. And they're wearing these shirts that say, Gays for Gaza. And we want to ask these kids, do you know that being gay in Gaza is udad? It's a crime under Sharia, a very serious crime that is punishable by death. It's terrible. So let's look at the Sharia, which is not an easy place to go, especially if you're not Muslim, and especially if you're an Islamist. And remember, what is an Islamist? Some say that someone who is loosely defined as a Muslim. So people who don't like Islamists will give it a negative connotation. And they'll say, yes, he may be a follower of Allah, but if you're an Islamist, you see Islam as a political, religious, cultural way of life that you have a sacred duty to maintain, no matter what it costs you. And it never changes. The rules stay the same. There's no modernization of the 7th century rules. Now, obviously, that was a non-Islamist telling me his opinion about that. But many Islamists say, and I did not speak to any Islamists, but I did read as much as I could about it. They say that being an Islamist is the only way to stay Muslim in the modern world. And to do that, you have to follow Sharia. You have to follow the laws. Sharia, which means so many things, good things and bad things. And I think there are a lot. There's lots and lots of good in Sharia. And one good thing, you have to share water. That is Sharia. And of course that makes perfect sense because Sharia is written in a world, in the desert, right? You can't live without sharing the limited water supply. So that's good. And prayer is a major part of Sharia. Sharia says that you must take time every day, 5 times every day, to pray. So prayer is good, and you have to wash before you pray. And it's so interesting, not just your hands, you have to wash. I don't know if you've ever seen a Muslim. You have to wash your ears, you have to wash inside your mouth, you have to wash your feet, you do a little of this. There are stations in airports that you can, especially in Michigan, you can, we had them in the hospitals too when you have a large Muslim population. But prayer is good, and so is fasting, right? Sharia says you must fast in honor of Allah. You have to make sacrifices to God for the good that comes from God. And all of this can sound very familiar to good Christians or good Jews, right? And making pilgrimages like the Hajj, gathering together to honor and worship the God who created everything. That's all good. But also good is war, according to an Islamist. So be prepared. Making a just war, if the need arises, is essential to serving God, Allah. It's a toughie, right? Now, Muslims are not the only ones who believe in that concept of just war. It's part of Christians, it's part of Jewish. I mean, we haven't stopped being willing to go to war at any time in the history of mankind, right? The entire planet seems to be practicing it at one time or another. But under Sharia, you must be willing to go to war. But when you go to war, you have to be certain to follow the rules of a just war, to make sure that the war is properly conducted and the proper outcome is achieved. So part of Sharia is you have to win the war, no matter what it costs, or there will be consequences. I told you, very complicated, which brings us to punishments under Sharia. Very complicated and very concerning for some people. So this entire concept of punishment is called uquba in Arabic. And there are lots of different categories of punishments. And today we're just going to hear a few of them, but there are so many. And so many of them sound, or they seem to be barbaric to us. But are they? Think about that. Are they barbaric? Of course not, say the Sharia supporters. Of course they're not barbaric. These people say that, Jewish law is so much more barbaric than Sharia. And others say, please, Christian law is the most barbaric of all, according to the way some Muslims see Catholic canon law working. So imagine this. You break a church doctrine. You commit a mortal sin. You're a member of the Catholic Church. And it's a mortal sin. So what is the punishment? Hell. You go to hell. And you don't just go there until you've learned your lesson and then they let you out. Oh, no, no, no. For committing a mortal sin, you stay there and you burn there forever in hell, in agony, for all time. You never get relief. Now that's barbaric, right?
True, even today, in the Catholic Church?
Oh, yeah, even missing mass on Sunday is a mortal sin.
If it can be proven that that was intentional.
Right.
But see, we're talking about things like we're experts at this, and I am not an expert. Now, I have a friend that he's a bishop right here at the Epiphany Cathedral. He is an expert on Catholic canon law. So I said, Monsignor, will you come? Nope. Will you come to my? Nope. Because it's complicated, and there simply isn't enough time to say, oh, I got 20 minutes, let me explain this to you. You know, it's something that I think you have to pray on and live with. And, you know, and as someone who was raised in Catholic canon law, you know, people who didn't get married again because you'd go to hell, or people who had 12 babies and then died and couldn't take care of the 12 babies you know, we have so many reasons about why so many things just don't seem right to us. It's just not right for us to discuss them until we live them and know more about it. So depending on what time you have to focus on this will just give you an idea that it's an issue that concerns all of us, not just Muslims or Jews or Catholics or people who don't believe in, say they don't believe in any God at all, something. But do you believe in eternal damnation? That's a topic for another day, right? Lutherans don't. But Muslims say, some Muslims say, Sharia law is much, much more merciful than the law of Moses or that Catholic canon law that the Pope gives you. In fact, many Muslims say that Sharia is nothing more than good advice. So you should follow everything in Sharia because all Sharia is upright and positive. And that's kind of the other side of the pendulum. But of course, not everyone agrees with that. For example, what if you're a woman or a girl? Is Sharia right for you? Because some people say women have no rights under Sharia. Yes, of course.
All right, there are a couple of things. I studied this is so dense, I mean, to even find the rules. However, in my research, I just read just a couple of years ago where an 8-year-old girl was tortured and killed publicly because she was not wearing a hijab. And this was in the news. This is world news.
Was this the United States?
No.
Okay.
And last night, and this is also in Iran, where it's not just the men cracking down on women, this patriarchal society as I see it. An Iranian woman was sitting on like a bus bench, and she had very moderate, above the knees, shorts on. This other woman notices and she said, "You can't dress like that."
Well, I just read that article that you sent
Oh,
out.
yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't get it to play, but same thing. But if you don't mind me adding to this, has anyone ever had encounters, no, this has to be years ago, I think, with Catholic nuns
Oh, yes.
in school? They're not exactly the most, I mean, we didn't have hijabs, but even though we all went home and wore our half slips around our heads because we wanted to be nuns, you know, we, it's a tough business. And Jewish women will say, do you really have to shave your head when you become an Orthodox Jew, you know, and only wear wigs out there because you don't want your hair to entice you? Other men, and we all have something to carry with us, and the challenge that we have And I think we have to carry our concern, there's no doubt about it, and I think we'll get into that a little bit more. But we have to understand that we don't understand how other people are feeling about everything. And that's hopefully what we're doing here today, getting closer. Because I think she's absolutely correct, Jeanette, when she says in many communities, not just in Iran or Pakistan, but here too, the father or the husband is in charge of everything. Everything that touches anything to do with being a female. And I do mean everything. For example, now this is Sharia, without explicit, expressed approval from her husband or her father, under Sharia, a woman can't have a pet. You have to have so you couldn't go to a pet store and buy a pet unless you had a note from your husband or your father. You can't go out on your own. Many women can't drive an automobile. You can't have a child, for example, unless it's okay with your husband. You can't listen to music unless you get permission. Now, these are laws, written laws. Definitely can't go swimming in mixed company. There's a time, if there's a pool, a community pool in your town or village, it's timed. This is time for the men to swim, this is time for the women. But you can, and I've seen this, and you probably have too, when it's women's swim time, the fence is surrounded by men like this. But you don't see women surrounding when it's men's time to swim. And you definitely, positively can't be a lesbian under Sharia. That's out. And everyone, and I don't know how you feel about this, male and female, whether you're young or old, you have to be ready to commit to fatwa. Fatwa. Have you ever heard of fatwa? Which legally, it's a declaration of assassination. So if you're called, you better pick up that phone and do your duty to Allah, because martyrdom is not only encouraged, it's demanded. Sounds awful, right? And we're going to talk more about that. But how about something like easy, like stealing? Stealing, that is illegal under Sharia, makes sense. Now, you've heard of the 3-finger discount, shoplifting. Well, listen to this. It comes from Sharia. First time thieves, they lose these 3 fingers for stealing. Just chopped right off. And of course, also part of the punishment is you have to return what you stole. Even if you ate it or spent it or something, you have to get it and give it back. And if you steal again after you lost 3 fingers, then you lose a foot. And I
Not the hand.
no, I mean, please, these aren't animals. You need 2 hands. But does that sound right to you, right?
No.
Now, the worst crime is punished with the worst punishment. And guess what Sharia defines as the worst crime on the planet?
Sex before
Apostasy.
marriage, adultery.
No, sort of, no. What did you
Oh,
say?
I said sex before marriage, but
No.
do I remember a woman or a girl, whatever, being raped and then she was killed?
Yes, for being a hussy.
Yeah.
And it's not just then, it's every day. It is every day, and it's in my deacon class, there's a man whose wife is Swedish, and I think he has Swedish citizenship too. And they go back regularly. And Sweden is a sanctuary country. Complete, no borders, everybody comes in. And the majority of immigrants have been Muslim. The majority of Swedes, not Muslim, and they would have very different mindsets concerning cultural responsibilities. And the number of rapes of Swedish women particularly young women, dramatically is off the charts. And as men are brought to trial in Sweden for this, they said, well, what do you expect? You let your women walk home from school in short skirts. What do you expect a normal man? How about not rape? You know, but there's that cultural, you know, we talk about it all the time, comedy, you know, being sensitive and aware. My feelings are not your feelings. Your beliefs are not my beliefs. But I respect you. But who respects rape of a young girl? You know,
Aren't they rethinking this whole thing about open borders? I read one of the Scandinavian countries was, you know, rethinking it because their country isn't what it was.
they've been rethinking of it.
Yeah.
But, you know, they're not autonomous. They belong to
Well,
the European
Yeah.
Union, who made the decision,
Well,
which was led by a Lutheran woman, if you remember, in Germany, the daughter of pastor, granddaughter of a pastor, who of course I've lost her. What was her name?
Merkel?
Yes,
Oh,
Merkel,
yeah,
um,
100,000,
who-
come on in.
and it has just, I mean, you must have seen recently what happened in northern, I guess, Africa into territory, Spanish territory, that it's what happened to Texas when there was no border. There was just mass unvetted migration, and we got this terrible reputation of people who don't welcome immigrants. And probably most of us at this table are either immigrants or family members of immigrants. We all came from someplace else, unless you're one of those Seminoles and Misakotu. You could be part of that. But you see what I mean? How we label people, it's so scary and dangerous when we're trying to protect what we have, share what we have. At the same time, it's very, very complicated. But this is not complicated. The number one crime in Sharia is conversion. Converting. So who said apostasy? Yeah, very close. Leaving Islam for another religion. That is punishable by death. Public hangings. And it sounds scary, and I think it should sound scary. But when I say it sounds scary, I get the feeling, and not just from Muslims, but from other people who are probably a lot more liberal than I am, and I think I'm pretty liberal, but I'm told that you have to find cultural comity in another faith community.
I'm sorry, what's that word mean?
It means being sensitive to other people's cultural commitments. So, you know, after your wife has had 12 children and she can barely put one foot in front of the other, don't go home and have unprotected sex, because you get more pleasure without the protection. You know, that's just not right on your part. Well, that's not being sensitive to that man's cultural commitment, which is fun. You know, if I'm, say some. You know, it's a very difficult. We try very hard, I think, not to be Islamophobic or anti-Semitic or racist or sexist. We're not supposed to show hate or fear of Islam, and I agree with that. But voicing concerns concerning Sharia becoming a component of the U.S. justice system may not be Islamophobic. You might be concerned that it's not the best move for citizens of this country. Now, do you think that Sharia and United States constitutional law can coexist at the same time?
Not at all.
I mean,
Interesting.
at least
Maybe
one
sometime in the
area,
future.
the freedom of religion in the Constitution, and now they're saying we're gonna kill you if you go from whatever religion their religion to some other.
Well, you ask some Muslims this, and I did manage to find some people, but it's not necessary to show you their answers. They say, of course they can coexist. They're coexisting this very minute all over the world. There are actually, and I did not know this, right this very minute, Sharia tribunals operating in the United States, in Texas, Minnesota, and Michigan. There are panels, which are called tribunals, a group of Muslim men who represent Muslims who live by Sharia, and those on those Sharia tribunals are actually inside U.S. courtrooms to advise U.S. judges on their rulings in those courtrooms. Now, does that surprise you or concern you?
Conservative.
And
Yeah.
how does that work for you?
I think they
Now,
might
we're
do
in
that.
Florida, right?
Sure.
And you're a Muslim man, and you're married to a Muslim woman, and let's say that you and your wife are having marital issues. You can't get along. So you take your wife to court to divorce her. Well, because you're a Muslim, there will be a Sharia court tribunal in that Florida courtroom to hear the case along with the U.S. judge. Now, we are divorced within our community of faiths, right? So that we can, but doesn't it seem like the communities of faith honor the U.S. court decisions of who's divorced? You just can't sign a petition to each other, I divorce you, you divorce me. It has to be done legally. You take that to your community of faith and they say, okay, you're divorced. But the Sharia tribunal is there to school the U.S. judge in Muslim priorities. They will make it very clear to the American judge what matters in the Muslim world. And many say that, very sadly, this often means that the wife is always guilty of destroying the marriage. And some people say that when you vote to allow Sharia tribunals in the U.S. courtrooms, you are voting, now I make this clear, you're voting to allow private, faith-based resolutions to take the place of U.S. constitutional laws.
Where's separation of state and
Exactly. So that legally constitutional law is being replaced by Sharia law.
Who allowed that in Texas? Who would have allowed them to do that in Texas?
There's a large Muslim population that demanded it. We're going to live here and we're entitled to our rights. Interesting. Now,
Well, we have
some
one here now, you know.
some people
17th Street.
say that usually means that you're turning over your rights as a U.S. citizen to your Sharia tribunal to enforce laws that may be unconstitutional, right?
And in the tribunal, there are no women.
No, please.
Wait a minute, though. Every justice on the Supreme Court was appointed by a man.
Yeah,
Are we different?
no.
Oh, yes,
It is
I totally
different.
believe that the United States Supreme Court is totally different than any Sharia tribunal with which I am familiar, because and we're gonna talk about that, because they're confined by they're supposed to be confined by the US Constitution.
Supposed to be.
Yeah,
But
Um,
every single one of them, a woman is never appointed a justice. They have no say in it.
but that's very interesting you say that, because if we explore the nuances of that statement, it's just not true. Because many people say there is such a political component of and which is why the Supreme Court is being designated as something that's gotta hit the road, because it's so out of touch with American society today. But if you look at that, since women have had the vote in this country, they have vastly affected who's on that Supreme Court, because someone, a president, will appoint a Supreme Court justice in response to his constituency. And women are a large part of women vote more often than men.
I think they appoint based on their leanings,
Oh, yes,
exactly.
yeah. no,
Yeah, on the beliefs, and to satisfy their constituents. Not to say, well, it's important to me, because they're not gonna be around when most of those cases, the president is not gonna be around for most of those cases. But in terms of regime maintenance, in terms of keeping your particular political party in power, see, that's why I said it's so complicated. You have to address the needs of men and women simultaneously, even though they're very different. Same thing with religious groups. So yeah, that's not true with Sharia. They don't care if you like it or not. So it is a different kind of, they are on a mission, like the Blues Brothers, a mission from God. They have to keep you on the path. So it is different in a nuanced sense, but I certainly see your point. It's about during time we have I don't know who we're gonna get, but we'll see. Now, I promise you, this is very, very tricky. And my experience has been that when anyone questions allowing Sharia tribunals in US courts of law, or even if you display like a little hesitancy about supporting full implementation of voluntary Sharia law adherence, you will invariably be labeled a hater, a racist even. And if you're white and you're Christian, you know what they're gonna call you, Christian nationalist or a white supremacist even. And that just stops the discussions. It's so sad. There's no talking about the law, everyone's just talking about labeling. If you think this, then you're nothing but this. You know, it gets us nowhere. And how about this little conundrum? Do you support Sharia law tribunals as part of the public school system? Muslims pay taxes.
No.
They should be represented. But do you support tribunals even if the majority of Sharia law favors teaching children martyrdom? Training kids to be martyrs for Allah. That sounds terrible to us, right? But it sounds absolutely essential for many, many Muslims who aren't murderers, who aren't killers, who are just good people trying to follow the way. Very, very tricky. Do you ever get the feeling that, you know, if Muslims want to teach their kids that, that's their business. It's not up to us to determine. But others ask, do you know any Christian doctrines that are presented in any US public school system that prepares students to become martyrs? You know, give your life for what you believe. But should we even be comparing religions, or should we just be tolerant, culturally sensitive?
Comment.
Of course. Oh, I thought you were saying amen, but comment, yes. I'm like, yes, we should be tolerant.
In schools for a while, and I don't know what states necessarily, parents would walk in and see their children in Hindu or Buddhist poses meditating. And the teachers taught that so that they could calm them down in the middle of the day. However, an outward form represent what goes on in that particular religion. Then another one is that I've heard Sharia law wants to demand, I don't think they can do it yet, places in the back of the classroom where how many would there be? Like 2 times during the school hour, the boys especially could go in the back and do their prayers.
We have to, I don't know, not interesting. Prayer is a pillar of Islam. It's required, whether you're Shia or Sunni, you're required to pray 5 times a day. But there's all kinds of.
Right, this is not assimilation into the country,
No,
in
not
my opinion.
assimilation.
No.
But assimilation is so out of style these days. Those are our days when you expected immigrants to come and become Americans. We're a country of immigrants, assimilated. That's just not the case anymore. Now people want to come with their belief. Some people want to come and find a place to keep what they believe is important. They don't want to assimilate it. And remember when, I mean, I don't know if you had immigrants in your family, but remember your grandfather or something, he would say to your father, you're not letting her out of the house like that, are you? You know, you're not gonna let her, you know, you wanna keep your kids the way you were raised as a kid. So we all have that. It's a very complicated. But do you think that Sharia law is necessary in the United States to protect Muslims who live in the United States, and especially Muslims who march in protest to American doctrines, which is protected by United States law? Freedom of speech, very important. And these Muslims are shouting as they protest, death to America, death to Americans, or death to Israel, death to Jews. Now I believe that all of us here at this table, and at our church, we feel very strongly about protecting people and religious freedoms for all people, right? But if you ask some people, do you want to institutionalize a system that protects the rights of people who intend to destroy the constitutional rights of the country that gives them those rights?
I live
So
near-
complicated.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, but this is not new, is my point. I mean, we've been looking at this for centuries.
Well, several years ago, I lived near Columbia University in New
Oh,
York
yeah.
City when the takeover, and maintenance men were locked in a building, not able to get out to get to their families or anything, and Jews in particular
It was anti-Israel.
were being harassed by Muslim students who were protesting and carrying flags. The whole neighborhood
But they
was
weren't
afraid.
even Muslims in most cases. They were political
and
activists,
Palestinians.
which is another thing. Doesn't matter if you
Being paid by
politically,
somebody else, by being paid to show up.
some people say that, or some
Very
people say,
possibly.
I mean, I'm not a black person, but I participated in the civil rights movement. You know, so you don't have to be Muslim to march for Gaza or march for the West Bank or whatever it happens to be.
But it was violent.
And you know, it's interesting, I brought up a very similar situation in my hometown, New York City, Washington Square Park. You know, spent a lot of time there. There were self-identified Muslims carrying signs and shouting, praise to Hamas, praise to Hezbollah, and signs that say, kill another Israeli now. How can that be okay? You know, but it is protected under
That shouldn't be.
US. And there was another large gathering in Dearborn. Is anybody here from Michigan or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
Close
know.
to it, going through it.
there was a recruiting rally inviting people to join. They called it the Islamic Revolution. I was so unaware of that.
My
So-
nephew, who is really fundamentalist Christian, joined the march or something similar, and they were giving him all kinds of pamphlets and talking to him. Well, he had some Christian literature, which they would not accept at
No,
all.
it cost them their lives. I mean, it would be very serious. But so many people, I think, and I asked this question, so many people who took part in those protests were not necessarily religiously Muslim. You know, they weren't practicers of Islam. They were just politically aligned with this particular group.
Then, I have one question, which goes way back to what you were saying earlier.
Of course.
Has to do with Sharia law. Is that for both the Sunnis and the Shiites?
Yes.
So I'm curious, probably we don't have time, what is the difference? If we're all gonna follow Sharia law, why are we,
They don't.
So-
All people don't follow Sharia law, and that's one of the reasons.
well, are
One
they
is
good
the-
practicing Muslims
It's
then?
it's the same law for Shia and Sunnis, but not all Muslims follow it, and those who do are very concerned about those who don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone puts on a keffiyeh and grabs a gun and goes out and joins the revolution.
Yeah.
Keffiyeh, headscarf.
Okay.
A headscarf. So when I asked some Muslims, friends, long distance, I said, what do we do with this? What can we do about Muslim-led anti-American rallies? You know, it's very hard to be sensitive to someone who wants to wipe you off the face of the planet. And here's a few of the responses I received. And I didn't know everybody, but apparently this person shared it. Well, whatever you do, don't act like an Islamophobic. Don't act like you don't like them. Make it a point to treat Muslims better, and then you'll have less Islamism in your country. Make accommodations to Muslims. Pass laws that allow Sharia into American courts of law. But others said, join with others to combat radical Islam. None of us want violent extremism in any kind, right? And many Muslims believe exactly that. They don't want extremism either. Some people claim that radical Islam is dangerous because it's not just a faith, not just a religion, it's a political ideology. So it has a legal basis of order and, this is the scary part, a military doctrine component. And there are countries who have big forces, armies of soldiers who fight for Allah. So these countries clearly have no separation of church and state. And that's
the same.
Yeah, that's been true since the 7th century. Radical Islam, say some people, has always rejected what we might call the modern state, separation of church and state, and they favor a caliphate, a global caliphate, where everybody on the planet follows the same path to Allah. So they say, beware of jihad and jihadists, I've been told. And they're not just a tiny minority. They are dangerous. So beware of people, this was a quote to me, who talk about the World Trade Center bombing, 9/11. Oh, that was just something that some people did. It has
Right,
nothing.
Some people.
Yeah,
do.
some had nothing to do with Islam or Muslims. But what do we think about that? Do we think it had something to do with radical Islam?
Isn't that the general goal, to cover the earth and make everyone Islam?
Yes,
Yeah.
that
So
would-
that is-
so that's not radical.
absolutely.
That is
Now,
good.
have you ever
Remember
heard,
them.
have you ever heard the word, dawa? Dawa, D-A-W-A. These are acts, that are performed in order to get converts, so they're kind of evangelical acts. Like, you know, you go out, knock on doors, and you give them a gift basket, come to our church, there's more gifts for these kind of, but these are a little bit different because they blend humanitarian aid with subversive political activities. And, you know, we've been seeing a lot of this where, especially in Gaza, where those poor, hungry people are getting nothing from these humanitarian organizations, the so-called NGOs, who are there to distribute food, but aren't distributing food. They're keeping them for the soldiers or the whatever. But they're actually there to subvert the existing system, saying, oh, don't believe that anymore, follow this instead, because it's so much better than that. Well, some people see Sharia as a form of dawah. See, if we get Sharia here, it will be sort of a magnet, a way to say, it will be more comfortable for you to come to here, to be a Muslim, because we have Sharia, we have protection. It's called, and it's still called, I think, the Long March through the institutions. And it's been done before, very effectively in different places. It's called subversion from within. Now, be careful about this. I know what it's going to sound like. The Nazis were great at this. Now, I'm not comparing Muslims to Nazis or vice versa, but I am describing, and this was my field of study before I took another route, and I went to Spain for a whole year to study the origin of fascism. What happens? How can people do this? How does a whole country become what I thought was absolutely nuts? And once again, I'm describing a takeover of government institutions by a military political group. And this happened in Germany in the 1930s. And they called themselves the Nationalist Socialist Party. We call them Nazis today, but it was the same political party. And the takeover was called Gleichschaltung, which means synchronization of all the aspects of the state, including the civil laws and the social laws, your entire personal life. You can't get a license, you can't get a phone installed, you can't do anything without dealing with this particular government. Your religious life, you can't worship and as Lutherans we're very aware of that. The Lutherans in Germany gave the Lutheran Church to Hitler, and another church popped up, called the Confessing Church with Bonhoeffer. But religious life, laws that concern your family, all of these were blended together, and it was all placed under the power of the state. And I don't know if you've ever, it's terrifying, but if you've ever talked to people who came from Europe during this time, they say you just have no idea. There was nowhere else to go. If you wanted to get anything, you had to go to the one office. They were in charge of everything. You had no choice. Now, I'm not saying that Sharia is Gleichschaltung, but do you think that it's possible that Sharia could be seen that way? And once again, could it work here? And almost everyone I ask say no, because Sharia is religious law, and American law separates religious from civil law. But what about using Sharia just when it comes to family law? Now, we must be at time, is that correct? So I would like to stop here with you all and wish you come back, send me anything you want to work on next week. I wish you Shavua Tov, have a good one after I just said such